It's February 27th, 2026, and in Washington, D.C. today, a number is circulating that almost nobody in the Trump administration wants to talk about. After more than a year of sweeping layoffs, canceled contracts, gutted agencies, and some of the most dramatic promises ever made about the size of the American government, Congress has finished passing its 2026 budget bills. And the result? Federal spending went up, not down, up. That's not a typo, that's not spin from political opponents, that's what the budget math says. 12 months ago, Elon Musk, the world's richest man, a private citizen with no official title, and as his lawyers would later argue, no accountability to ethics laws, stood inside the executive office of the president and told the country he was going to cut $2 trillion from the federal budget. He later walked it back to $1 trillion. He said it would happen by the end of fiscal year 2025. It didn't. This week, a budget analyst at the Brookings Institution put DOGE's final realistic savings at somewhere between $20 and $40 billion, roughly 1 to 2% of what was promised. Meanwhile, a separate nonpartisan analysis found that DOGE's actions may have cost American taxpayers an estimated $135 billion in lost productivity, paid leave, rehirings, and legal fees. And this very morning on Substack, a prominent tax economist named Alan Cole confirmed he had just collected $128,000, his entire life savings, from a public bet he made that DOGE would fail to reduce federal spending. He won. So tonight, we are asking the question the internet is screaming: what exactly happened? Where did the money go? Who is accountable? And what does this mean for you? This is the efficiency illusion. To understand DOGE, you have to go back to a rally in Madison Square Garden in October 2024. Elon Musk, already the biggest individual donor of the entire 2024 election cycle, having spent more than $290 million to back Donald Trump, took the stage and made a promise that would echo across the next year of American political life. He said DOGE could cut federal spending by at least $2 trillion. The crowd went wild. It was a number, by the way, that was larger than the entire 2023 discretionary spending budget of the United States government. But the crowd didn't know that, and neither apparently did the plan. On January 20, 2025, his first day back in office, President Trump signed an executive order that officially renamed the United States Digital Service as the U.S. DOGE Service, embedding it directly inside the executive office of the president. DOGE was real, it had a desk, it had access. What it did not have, critics would argue, was a legal mandate, an ethics framework, or in several cases, employees old enough to have worked a full decade in any industry. DOGE's workforce was young, some were in their 20s. Many had deep ties to Musk's private companies, Tesla, SpaceX. X1 reportedly went by the online handle Big Balls and had prior ties to a cybercrime community. These were the people handed access to federal personnel systems containing the private data of millions of government workers. Within weeks, the scope of what DOGE was doing became staggering. USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, which had operated for over 60 years distributing humanitarian aid abroad, was effectively dismantled. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was gutted. The Department of Education saw some of the deepest personnel cuts of any civilian agency. The IRS began planning to cut roughly 40% of its workforce. By February 2025, a deferred resignation program, essentially a paid buyout, was offered to federal workers across dozens of agencies. Roughly 75,000 employees took it. Another 200,000 federal workers would be laid off in the months that followed, though approximately 24,000 of those firings were later reversed by court order after judges ruled the firings were unlawful. By April 2025, Musk claimed publicly that DOGE had cut $150 billion. Fact-checkers disputed the number almost immediately. The congressman who chaired the House DOGE caucus, a Republican, later admitted that members had always known the savings figures were, in his own words, a massive exaggeration. By October 2025, after the fiscal year ended, the New York Times reported something remarkable. Budget experts and congressional appropriators still didn't fully know how much had actually been cut, or where the unspent money had gone. And by November 2025, a federal court formally disbanded DOGE. The entity created on January 20, 2025 was, legally speaking, dead before the end of the year. Let's talk about the math, because the math is where the story gets uncomfortable for everyone. DOGE maintained a public-facing website it called a wall of receipts, a running tally of claimed savings. As of the end of 2025, DOGE's official figure stood at approximately $190 billion saved. Here's the problem. A CBS News investigation found that multiple entries on that wall were overstated. Journalists identified billions of dollars in miscounting. DOGE, in many cases, listed the total potential value of canceled contracts, not what had actually been spent or saved, inflating the numbers significantly. The Partnership for Public Service, a nonpartisan nonprofit focused on federal workforce management, ran a competing analysis. Their math looked at the $270 billion in annual federal compensation costs and calculated the actual impact of DOGE's actions. Employees on paid leave still drawing salaries, workers rehired after wrongful terminations, and a documented drop in productivity across agencies as workers spent time documenting their weekly tasks for DOGE compliance. Their conclusion: DOGE's actions cost taxpayers an estimated $135 billion this fiscal year alone. Not saved, cost. The IRS numbers are arguably the most alarming. The agency had been planning to cut roughly 40% of its workforce under DOGE pressure. The Yale Budget Lab estimated that gutting the IRS at that scale could cause the federal government to forego $323 billion in tax revenue over the next decade, as audits decline and wealthy filers become less likely to comply. The IRS itself, internally, predicted a revenue loss exceeding $500 billion due to DOGE-driven cuts. Let that land for a second. An initiative launched in the name of fiscal responsibility may end up costing the government $500 billion in revenue it will never collect. And DOGE's own budget. The U.S. DOGE Service requested $45 million for fiscal year 2026, more than double its 2025 budget of $20 million. The efficiency agency needed more money to keep being efficient. Now, to be fair, supporters of DOGE make a legitimate philosophical argument. Former Republican budget experts and conservatives at think tanks like the Cato Institute acknowledge that the federal government does carry significant bureaucratic overhead. Dominic Lett, a budget analyst at Cato, confirmed that Congress did largely reject the discretionary spending cuts Trump proposed in 2025, suggesting the problem wasn't the goal, but the execution and the politics. Their case: a leaner federal government over time could reduce the structural deficit. The $38 billion in direct savings from layoffs, Partnership for Public Service concedes, will materialize over 10 years. That's real money. And some waste was genuinely identified and cut. But here's the policy hole that neither side wants to acknowledge out loud. The single biggest drivers of federal spending are Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and debt service. Together, they consume the overwhelming majority of the budget. President Trump has repeatedly and explicitly promised not to touch those programs, which means the math for achieving a $1 trillion cut without touching entitlements was never real. It could never have been real. Budget expert Jessica Riedel at Brookings put it plainly: the only way DOGE-style cuts could reach transformational scale would be to take an axe to programs that tens of millions of Americans rely on daily. Congress-facing voters wouldn't do it, and didn't. The result, as NPR's analysis found at the close of fiscal year 2025, federal spending had actually increased by hundreds of billions of dollars compared to the year before. The federal government was not smaller. It was bigger, more chaotic, and in several agencies running with skeleton crews trying to maintain services designed for full staffs. And then there is the question of human cost. Professor Brooke Nichols at Boston University began tracking deaths attributable to the sudden halt of USAID foreign aid programs in early 2025. By May of that year, she estimated the cuts had contributed to roughly 300,000 deaths, the majority of them children in low-income countries who had been dependent on U.S.-funded nutrition, healthcare, and disease prevention programs. As of February 5, 2026, her running counter exceeded 793,900. That is a number that has received almost no coverage in mainstream American media. It should be receiving much more. If you've been on the internet at any point in the last 14 months, you already know that DOGE did not just happen in Washington, D.C. It happened on your phone, in your group chat, on your For You page. Let's be real about what this looked like online, because the internet's reaction to DOGE is its own story. In January and February of 2025, DOGE's early moves were treated on X, formerly Twitter, now owned by the man running DOGE, like a Silicon Valley product launch. Musk posted constantly. His supporters flooded replies with chainsaw emojis, a callback to Argentine President Javier Milei's signature prop. The vibe was, we are the disruptors. Government is the incumbent. This is a startup takeover. And Musk's X algorithm made sure his posts stayed at the top of everyone's feeds. Critics noted with considerable alarm that the man running the efficiency initiative also owned and operated the primary platform where that initiative was being narratively shaped. That is a conflict of interest that would have ended a lesser public figure's credibility immediately. On TikTok, the reaction was more divided and more visceral. Federal workers began posting videos of their last days on the job. Veterans Affairs employees, CDC researchers, USDA bird flu experts, yes, the ones fired during an active bird flu monitoring period, filming themselves packing boxes. These videos racked up millions of views. The comments were split cleanly. Good, the government is bloated, versus these are real people, real services. The bird flu expert firing became one of the most viral single moments of the whole DOGE saga. The image of infectious disease specialists being laid off while the government was actively monitoring a potential outbreak was, for many viewers, the moment the abstract became concrete. Late-night comedians had a field day. It also happened to be medically alarming, which didn't help the optics. On Substack, the critique built slowly but steadily. Center-left and center-right policy writers, people who had initially been cautiously open to efficiency reform, began publishing detailed breakdowns of the numbers by spring 2025. The tone shifted from skeptical to damning. By fall, a growing number of writers across the ideological spectrum were using phrases like governance by chaos and performative austerity. The meme ecosystem around DOGE was always uncomfortable to square. DOGE was, after all, named after an internet dog meme, the Shiba Inu face that had been used to mock cryptocurrency speculation since 2013. The name was on some level a joke that became a government agency. Critics leaned into this. They named it after a meme and ran it like one. Supporters said it was intentional branding, approachable, anti-establishment, disruptive. The political entertainment angle reached peak absurdity when Tesla, Musk's car company, became a protest target. As DOGE backlash mounted, some consumers stopped buying Teslas. Sales fell. First quarter 2025 profits plunged 71%. Trump, in one of the stranger moments of a strange year, held a public event on the White House lawn to personally praise Tesla vehicles, in what observers described as a billionaire using the presidency as a product endorsement platform. Musk himself did not handle the backlash gracefully. He complained about it online. He reportedly carried his young son X as what some observers called an informal public relations buffer during White House appearances. He was spotted at a Saudi royal dinner months after announcing he was stepping back from DOGE, suggesting the stepping back was more public relations than reality. And the 57% disapproval rating in the Washington Post, ABC News Ipsos poll, showing most Americans disapproved of Musk's role in government, never really recovered. By the end of 2025, the internet had largely moved on. DOGE had been disbanded by a court, Musk had reduced his public profile, and the X algorithm no longer felt quite as relentlessly DOGE forward. But the effects had not moved on. The agencies were still understaffed. The lawsuits were still pending, and the budget was still bigger than it was when the whole thing started. So here is where we land. It is February 2026. The midterm elections are 9 months away, and the reckoning from DOGE is just beginning to take shape. Let's talk about what that means for the average American. First, the IRS. If the workforce cuts hold, if that 40% reduction is not reversed or replaced, the Yale Budget Lab's projection of $323 billion in lost tax revenue over a decade is not a hypothetical. It is a structural change to the federal government's ability to collect money it is legally owed. The implication is simple. When the government collects less revenue, it either borrows more, cuts services, or both. The people least able to absorb those cuts are not the wealthy. They rarely are. Second, the courts. As Brookings' Jessica Riedel predicted, the budget battle has shifted from the headlines to the judiciary. Right now, judges across the country are deciding whether the Trump administration had the legal authority to impound, that is, refuse to spend money that Congress already appropriated. These cases will not be resolved quickly. They will shape the boundaries of executive power for a generation, and most Americans are not watching them. Third, the One Big Beautiful Bill, the sweeping domestic policy legislation that Trump pushed through in 2025, is projected to add $2.4 trillion to the federal deficit between 2025 and 2034. The same administration that promised to slash $2 trillion from the budget is on net adding trillions to the national debt. Whether or not you find that hypocritical depends on your politics. The math, however, does not care about politics. Now, the 2026 midterms, Democrats see DOGE as the gift that keeps on giving politically. The combination of chaotic layoffs, a court-disbanded federal agency, and a final savings number that represents a fraction of 1% of what was promised is in a vacuum a compelling indictment. Expect DOGE to appear in attack ads in swing districts from Virginia to Arizona. Republicans face a more complicated argument. The conservative base largely supported the idea of DOGE. Government is too big. Spending is out of control. Someone had to try. The political challenge is separating the idea from the execution. Candidates in purple districts may find themselves defending a program that their own House DOGE caucus chair admitted was built on exaggerated numbers. The wildcard, Elon Musk himself. Trump's statement that DOGE's work will conclude no later than July 4, 2026, Independence Day, gives the administration a narrative endpoint before the midterm stretch run. Whether that landing is managed as a success story or a quiet burial will tell us a great deal about where the Republican Party thinks its voters actually are on this issue. Here is what we can say with confidence tonight. The federal government is not more efficient than it was in January 2025. By multiple independent measures, it is spending more, collecting less, operating with diminished institutional knowledge, and carrying the costs of a year of legal battles that have not yet concluded. The promised revolution in government spending did not happen, not because the idea of efficiency was wrong, but because the execution was built on numbers that could not survive contact with political reality. The big programs, the ones that actually drive the debt, were never on the table. What ended up on the table were the programs that serve the most vulnerable: foreign aid, public health infrastructure, consumer protections, education. The people who lost their jobs were, by nearly every account, not the sources of waste. They were the workers, the ones who answered the phones, who tracked the disease outbreaks, who processed the veterans' claims. And the man who promised to save $2 trillion and delivered, by the most generous estimate, somewhere between 20 and 40 billion before the court stepped in, is currently attending private dinners with foreign dignitaries. No accountability, no consequences, and no clear answer to the question that started all of this. What are we actually going to do about the national debt? That question remains unanswered. And whoever answers it honestly, with real numbers, real trade-offs, and real respect for the complexity of a $7 trillion federal budget, will be the person worth listening to in 2026. Everyone else is still selling the meme. DOGE was officially disbanded by federal court in November 2025. The Trump administration has stated its work will conclude by July 4, 2026. Multiple lawsuits regarding the legality of its actions remain pending.